Great. Today, we welcome back Nicky Schauder. Nicky and her husband Dave are the founders of Permaculture Gardens. The Schauders are award-winning permaculturalists with a passion for health, food, and regenerative agriculture. Before moving to their current 3-acre farm, Nicky and Dave provided food for their family of 8 in their tiny townhouse on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. There they learned to adapt to small spaces, lean budgets, suburban critters, and even HOA restrictions. Their passion to pass on their garden knowledge is fueled by their desire to have families discover that growing ecologically leads to true freedom and abundance. Please welcome back Nicky.
Yay! Thank you so much, Emma. And oh my goodness, over 200 people here. I'm so excited to be with you. Today, I am just going to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do in 1 minute. So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, The 10 Forgotten Steps of Organic Gardening. My name is Nicky Schauder, and I'm a mom, gardener, and permaculturalist at permaculturegardens.org. In this session, we'll be doing a little intro to permaculture. Specifically, I'll walk you through 1, defining what we mean when we say permaculture, and honestly, it does have different meanings for different people. 2, dive right into those 10 forgotten steps. And 3, do a Q&A with you all. Are you ready for that? We're going to do all of this via song. And with that, I am going to screen share my screen. Hopefully you all see this. And it's so exciting to see where everyone is growing from. Quite honestly, we have Italy. We're speaking to somebody from Italy this next week regarding our Sage app. And then we were in somebody's from Dortmund. So I know that's all over the States, which is where usually we teach, and we have gardeners all over the States, but it's so exciting to have other countries represented as well in this event. So welcome. So the 10 forgotten steps of organic gardening, it's an intro to permaculture. I'm going to walk through this. I've done this presentation quite a few times. So I'm going to walk through this, and go ahead. If you think of a question, you pop it in the chat. I know some of you are growing in different contexts in drought, talking about soils, you're growing in straw bales because your soil's not good. This is really more of an overview of permaculture, but I love these specific questions because that's where I learned permaculture. And at the end of it, I had so much more questions, and somehow I didn't find that help that I needed right away with those specific questions on gardening. And that's where we started what we did. We started Permaculture Gardens because the permaculture teachers at those times were doing large scale, answering big questions for big agricultural tracts of lands. And we had like this tiny townhouse, which we'll talk to you about in a bit. Before I get ahead of myself, I have a workbook that accompanies this workshop. So if you forget everything I say, you have a workbook that kind of walks you through it in a deeper way. And it'll also detail sort of the resources that you can access as you go and assess your own properties. Because permaculture, as you will find out, is a lot about observing, assessing, analyzing your properties and the design that you have. So bit.ly/10-organic-garden-steps, or screenshot this bit link. And Emma and team, if you don't mind popping that bit.ly link in the chat for I'll be screen sharing this as well. So what to expect? So my 1 minute introductions, which we already have seen so many. I'm just gonna look at the chat once again. North Carolina. Oh, thank goodness you're safe, I hope. Weird weather we're having here for sure. Manassas, Virginia, so close to where I am. Leesburg. Mina from Dortmund. We were in Essen visiting my daughter, where she lived in Essen for a year last year, but she's back now. So we enjoyed Germany a lot last year. Washington, Asheville, North Carolina, Kennett Square. I know where that is because I have family that lives in Kennett Square. So wonderful, wonderful. I'm so happy that you all are here. Um, and a little bit about what we do. We are here to educate, inspire, and nurture a global community of families who provide themselves with food, medicine, and spiritual connection through ecological gardening. And our vision is to teach and discover how growing holistically leads to freedom and abundance. And we love doing these things. We love teaching. So, what got us into gardening, a little bit about me, is this is the introduction. Well, our first two kids, so this one uh, was the eldest, and she's much older. She's now 18, and she's the one who was in Germany. She was born with severe allergies, food allergies, and we could not figure out where it was coming from. And she was 18 pounds for 18 months, and we would rush to the ER so many times throughout her childhood. The second one, Ethan, same thing. He was allergic to fish, and and is still allergic to beans and peas and certain peas, no? And my eldest daughter, we found out was food allergies. She turned out to be allergic to so many things: milk, eggs, fish, chicken, not fish, that was the second one, chicken, eggs, dairy, gluten, and of course, all the nuts and the tree nuts. And then she went to Germany last year and she could eat hazelnuts there. So it was like, what? There must be something wrong with the food system, especially here in America. So that's what got us into gardening. We scoured books at that time. There was like one allergy-free cookbook. Um, but we found this word, we stumbled on this word, permaculture, in one of our bookstore dates. Dave and I, my husband Dave and I, and that's what got us into gardening. And so we grow for those reasons to make our family healthy. We grow for environmental reasons. I feel like I've always been an environmentalist ever since I was young. I was always on the, eco clubs at where I'm from. I'm from the Philippines, where growing up, there wasn't much talk about taking care of the environment, even though we were really surrounded by lots of wonderful paradise like nature and just biodiversity and all that stuff. Growing up in the Philippines and coming here, I always carried that with me and wanting to preserve the ecodiversity of the world is one of the reasons I do this. And finally, it's because when you actually do garden, I mean, amidst everything that is happening in the world, you just have to come back to the true, the good, and the beautiful. You just have to come back to the garden. And there is where whatever faith you are or lack thereof is where you really find groundedness and you find a creator. And so that's what we do this for. Talked about that. Okay, so why do you grow? And I love hearing these questions because then I can tailor this a little bit more, especially the answers later on. Oh my goodness, so many people here. California, question to address. Okay, I'm looking at your answers. Why do you grow? My goodness. Okay, could you post a list of 10 now? Huh? Oh, sorry. No, I'm not posting the list of 10. You'll have to take notes and stay till the end. So, what does the conventional system of agriculture look like? So the first part is, what is permaculture? And if anybody, I know I just asked the question, why do you grow? And that might take a moment to just answer, take a moment to like figure out why are we doing this in the first place, right? What's the real reason behind the reasons that we say initially? And when you go deep enough, post those answers in the chat because I do like engaging the audience. Normally I give webinars in a webinar, not in a webinar format so much as this, but like in a Zoom meeting format, so I can hear everybody's voices and see everybody's faces. Connect to Mother Earth and harvest healthy food. Yes. Gardening tills the soul. Working the garden gives me joy, and clean food is important to me. Oh my goodness, health concern, quality. I want to just save all your answers and just relive them and meditate on them. harvesting my own food is exercise. Absolutely. Oh my goodness, so many wonderful reasons. Okay, so before I go there, we talk about what is permaculture. And um, if anybody knows what permaculture is, I mean, put it in the chat. The truth is, when I finished my permaculture design certificate course, we were asked to create our own definition of permaculture by our teacher. Our teacher is Wayne Wiseman. He was taught by the person who created the word, Bill Mollison, who was the founder of this word, coined this word, where it's basically just a word to describe something that our ancestors have been doing for a long time. But I always, in order to answer it, I always look at, well, is it not? So here's where we look at the current conventional model of production. And this is how we produce stuff. So this image is from a video produced by Annie Leonard, who at one point, if not still, was the head of Greenpeace. And she looked into the production of stuff that we buy at our stores, right? And this is a very linear process, a very extractive process where you grow from, let's use our fossil fuels to create, let's say a toy, like a toy car, right? That we like to buy or for our kids. And it's created in China, and it's fossil fuels are used to create it, and plastics and such. And as a result, we expel more fumes into the atmosphere, and then we distribute it to our big box marts, where we purchase it at a cost that's not like matching the labor that created it, and then we bring it to our houses where we consume it, and they stay, it's like a toy car, for an average of 6 months before we dispose of it in the landfill. And this is all just to like question also our way of consuming things. The permaculture is not this linear extractive process. And sometimes even organic food production can still be linear like this, okay? That's what makes permaculture different from organic growing or, pesticide-free growing. Permaculture is a little bit more than that. This is my definition. It's a very cyclical economy. It's in fact, the way I like to look at it is a spiral. With each season, your inputs become your outputs, and your outputs become your inputs again. And that cycle, which maybe brings to mind, what does that bring to mind to you? That like cycle of an output becoming an input in the garden. I'd love to know in the chat. And so that brings us to this definition, which isn't the only definition, by the way, as a design system based on observation, which ties your home with your garden, with you and all the animals, and ultimately with the whole community, working with nature and natural laws. This is a very holistic approach and a very cyclical approach to how, and very zero waste, negative waste even approach to how we look at things or live things. And somebody who's a permaculturalist can apply this in their business, can apply this in music, in the way they live, not just necessarily the garden. And although that is where me and my husband like to play, is in the permaculture garden space. So there's a lot that goes on in it. And so there's the answer, right? Composting, if you guys, this image, creative organic, want healthy food. Okay, so this is what that cycle calls to mind, where your outputs become your inputs again, and composting is a big part of a permaculture garden. So I'm showing these are kids. Another thing is that we tend to grow because we're always teaching the next generation. And this is us in a school garden. School gardens are amazing ways. Any of you doing this, please make this an impetus to keep on growing. Every little bit counts. That every experience these kids have for gardening is amazing. At this point in time, around this time of the year, you may be taking some of these out of the out of the ground. And if anybody knows what this is, pop it in the chat. I'm looking and seeing to see if anybody knows what this is. Ginger, close. Sunchokes, Brian. Wonderful. Okay. Um, you know what? I'm gonna be fun and I'm gonna give a free seed packet to some of the people who get the answers right. So, Brian, send us your mailing address and your request for seeds because I have a bunch of seeds in my seed storage that I need to scatter to people so I don't just keep it in storage. The other thing that makes permaculture different is that it's based on ethics. Um, Earth care, I'll just be short about this. People care, we don't exploit people when we create the things, not like in a linear economy sometimes where we will pay super minimum less than living wage. And then fair share, everything that's abundant is distributed to those who don't have. So that's one of the things that makes permaculture. So now as we've done that, so we've done a little bit of what permaculture is, an intro to permaculture, I am going to sing the 10 crucial steps that most organic gardeners forget about, that's based on an Australian farmer and engineer named P.A. Yeomans, who thought of this way of designing landscapes or agricultural tracts in what he calls the scales of permanence. And I can never remember what the scales of permanence are except to sing this song. And I can't like go designing and say I'm a permaculture designer without having to like go back to my book. And so I'm hoping this might help you as well. And if anybody can guess the original song from which this came from, you get a free packet of seeds too. All right. So here's the first name that tune verse. First thing is to observe. In this picture, one big thing about permaculture too is that everything starts with observation and it ends and begins with observation again. At the end of each season, we're asked to go and we're asked to look at what's happening. And if we don't do this, we're not permaculture designers. We're just implementing like workhorses. So this is the most wonderful part because very meditative. Can you spot the bobcat in this picture and just go like lower left, lower right? Thanks, Brian, for that. Yeah, that's the bobcat. Where's the bobcat in this very bottom left corner? Oh, did everybody see that? Helen, wonderful. Okay, maybe more than people. Very bottom left corner. Yes, there it is. Wonderful. So that's one of the things. So first thing is to observe. So this is what I was telling you about. Australian farmer P.A. Yeomans in the 1950s came up with this way of looking at a land and breaking it down. So the first part starts with observation. He also invented key line design, which is if you live in a bigger place. I kind of specialize in smaller spaces, even though now we live in a 3-acre space. And this is what I'm learning more and more, is to like look at where the water would naturally pool and where I can bring it so that it doesn't run off from a mountainside. To think holistically. So first thing is to observe, to think holistically. Your garden is not in isolation. We think about our whole property, not just one kidney-shaped garden in a sunny corner. Now, it's true, we start small, like the video says, right? We start small and something is better than nothing. But when we start to design in a permaculture way, we also keep in mind the context in which we're growing and see where the pattern of what we're trying to create, like our little patch of herb garden, where does that fit in our property? I don't know if you know what your zones of use. Okay, yeah. So thinking holistically also means thinking of different niches in space that we can occupy. And sometimes we're just looking at 2D, vision of our garden where we just see like a lower level, but not taking into consideration the shade or the trees that are currently there or that can be there to provide the shade, or the wind breaks and such. And so this concept of designing with 7 layers in a food forest is something that many permaculturalists will employ, is like a technique. And it's not necessarily 7. Okay, it can be 10, 20. In a small home, like mine was in the townhouse, we had five layers. You know, you don't have an super duper large canopy layer. You just have like shrubs. But the important thing is that you're diversifying the way that you're looking at your three-dimensional space. So think about things that you can grow, and here's where the companion planting comes in a little bit too, alongside your herbaceous layer. So if you have some herbs, you can sneak in some root crops like garlic in there. Right now, that's what we're planting. That's what's ready to get out, is leeks and garlic and onions and chives alongside my lettuces. Um, and carrots too. I just direct sow my carrots. So that would help me create these layers. Some people say there's other layers like a mushroom layer and an aquatic layer. And the more diverse this is, the more players you get. In a permaculture garden, the more diverse your system is, the more stable it becomes. And that doesn't just mean biodiversity. In this case, it's like diversity of shape and form and layers. First thing is to observe, to think holistically. 3, note your zones of use. So what are these zones of use that we talk about in permaculture? Let me just check the chat. I've got 5. Karen! Karen, you got it. Karen Deal says, this song is you're adorable. Okay, Karen, send in your, so let's do Karen, and who was the first one who did the bobcat on the bottom left corner? Whoever did that. I'll let the hosts and panelists reach out to you if you got it. But yeah, Karen, definitely send your mailing address where you want the seeds and like your seed request, and I'll see if I can fulfill it. So, and if not, so give me a few options, okay? And I try to get those out like the day that I say I would. Otherwise, I'm not going to get them out. So I'm going to mail them as soon as this webinar is done. All right. So zones of use. I am going to tell you an anecdote from Bill Mollison, which I love and just sticks with me forever. Bill Mollison, who's the one who wrote the permaculture, what is it called? I'm looking here because I have it, or I used to have it. Did I give mine away? Permaculture, a designer's manual, this big black book, and in the 1970s, he would say, when you wake up in the morning and you put on your fuzzy slippers and you go outside to get chives for your omelet, if you come back and your fuzzy slippers are wet, you've walked too far. That's what Bill Mollison would used to say. I still get my fuzzy slippers wet because it's wet out there. But I do have a host of herbs. You know what? I don't get my fuzzy slippers wet because I use my chives are in my pots right here. But I'm still gonna put them out because I want more. So that is all to say that you want to design your garden in a way that makes sense for the way you live. So the zones that are closer to your home, for instance, are the zones that are most visited. So your home is like zone 0. Your kitchen garden would be zone 1. Your production garden would be zone 2. Your chicken coop would be zone 3. Things of that sort, right? And this is an example of that zoning. It's not necessarily circular all the time. It can be like different shapes. Like if you have a block of buildings, then that's definitely hampering, your zone. But that helps you to determine which one you should attack first. Because this is an overwhelming project, your whole property, right? Looking at your whole property. But my permaculture teacher, when we just moved here, he was like saying, remember zone 1 first, zone 1. And even if we wanted to get those trees in right away, this is year 3 for us in this 3-acre property. We wanted to get the trees in right away. So we planted whatever trees we could transfer over from our townhouse, and the deer annihilated them. Second year, I planted willow, deer annihilated them. Zone 0 had to be the first. So zone 0 was the house. until now, like the heating, if we just kind of attacked it, I'm saying like learn from my mistakes. If we just attacked it like from zone zero outwards, I think it would have been much better, but we're still making mistakes. And now is year 3, and we have a bunch of trees, and I think we're ready. I think we're ready this year. We really want to make this into a permaculture food forest. So in the workbook that is in the link here, you will find these pages that you can print out and start to go out there and actually observe and use to observe your property and think about. And there's some prompts to ask other things like what USDA growing zone, which is different from the zones of use, are you? All right, and what your annual temperature is, things of that sort. We'll talk about that in a little bit more. So, local climate. So, first thing is to observe, to think holistically. 3, note your zones of use. 4, know your local climate. Local climate is knowing much more deeply things about your property than anybody else who doesn't live there. And I love this because it makes you really situated grow in the context in which you and understand where you're growing. When you know this, which direction does the wind blow and from where does it come, at which times of the year, things like that. Where do you keep on seeing, in the cases of snow, if you're going to have snow, find out where does the snow melt last, why, or where, if you're in like the desert climates, where are there always weeds just in this area, right? And what are those? Well, we'll talk about weeds later, but that means that maybe there's some water there. Where do I need a windbreak? Are you on the shadow of a mountain or on the windward side of the mountain? So there's lots, depending on where you live, you may have a lake effect where snow forms when cold air moves over warm water, and then it gets the heat and moisture from the warm lake, and then it drops it on this side of the mountain, but doesn't drop it on the other side of the mountain. So knowing these things, we live on a mountain, we live on almost the top of the mountain. It's 3 degrees colder here than it is at the bottom of the mountain. But there's not that much wind because there's a lot of trees. So it's all these different things that are unique to your climate that you got to think about. But I invite you to think about. You don't have to. You just can choose to and spend that time exploring your context. So the first thing is to observe, to think holistically. 3, note your zones of use. 4, know your local climate. 5, find your microclimate. So what affects your microclimate? How is this different from your local climate? Okay, I guess in your space, is there an air conditioner in your property that drips water and makes it like really watery and cold there so you can grow kale even though you're in a hotter place? Is there a tree that's always blocking and makes this section of your house cooler? Is there a part, where's the western wall of your property that just is baked? And what kind of plants, Mediterranean plants, might want to live there that can take that heat? That kind of microclimate, like just in your home alone, just around the area, you can find little places where things can survive or not, or where things are more suitable than others. And we may be forcing plants that just don't like it there. We may be forcing Mediterranean plants that like dry weather, like rosemary and lavender, in soggy places, right? Where we should have mint. So so that's one part. So first thing is to observe, to think holistically. 3, note your zones of use. 4, know your local climate. 5, find your microclimate. 6, note topography. This is stuff that I'm still learning. This is the rice terraces that you can find in countries where I come from, in Thailand, in the Philippines. I come from the Philippines. And we have this majestic, I don't know, they used to call it the eighth wonder of the world, terraces, man-made terraces for thousands of years, just the way of growing rice, because rice loves a swampy base. And this was how they made it. They terraformed it to make sure that they gave that rice a swampy base. This is helpful if you do have a steep slope and you're trying to capture the water in your landscape. One of the things that we loved about permaculture, why my husband and I fell in love with it, was we watched a documentary on the lowest plateau in China, super desertified, overgrazed uh, location where they planted trees and stopped the overgrazing, and they were able to regenerate what was once desert into something that was lush. Same thing in Jordan with the work of Jeff Lawton. If you Google Greening the Desert Project, some of you may already have heard of that. That is just so inspiring. And we thought, if permaculture can do this, can green the deserts in the worst parts of Jordan where they get 4 inches of rain, then of course we can do it in our property in Northern Virginia where we get 40 inches of rain. You may be living in a property that gets similar amounts. Half of America is desertified, right? Is desert, is experiencing drought. Even we had like a drought of several weeks here that we experienced. And this is a way to mitigate it, is to capture the water in the landscape. And to design with this in mind. So what am I doing here? I'm actually using a shape. So later on we'll talk about aesthetics, but my friend had a very soggy backyard, too much water in her case, right? So I was trying to terrace it, but in the way of terracing it, I was also trying to put like a shape that would complement her property and make it more beautiful and interesting, because circles and are kind of more visually interesting. And as you round a circle, it's like what's around the corner, and it also served as a terrace. So first thing is to observe, to think holistically. 3, note your zones of use. 4, know your local climate. 5, find your microclimate. 6, note topography. How much water, is that my next one, runs across your roof? Okay, before I go there, so the water is number 7, but this one, if you have a smaller property, we did this. Okay, how do I translate terracing into my property? I just live on like 1/40th of an acre was where we lived. It was a tiny townhouse, shady backyard, and we would take the downspout water, where the rain comes, and we dug up an irrigation ditch. And this is we got this idea from, I don't want to take credit for that myself. We got this idea from permaculturalist Amy Strauss in this book. So we're actually a page on this book, and she's writing a new book, and she's asking for stories of shade gardens right now. So she's a big friend of ours, and she was one of our big inspirations. And so she had done this on her yard in somewhere in the Midwest. I'm sorry, I can't remember, Amy, where you live. But because we saw her pictures in her blog, 10th Acre Farm, we did the same. So downspout here, dug an irrigation ditch, covered it with stone, made it a walking path, so you don't actually see the water and it doesn't float up. It just looks dry, but every bit of water is sucked up here and fed our lettuces. So this is just an illustration. That's something that you might be able to do in your property. How much water runs across your roof? In the workbook, you will also find a little calculator. And I think I may have put this calculator on my website as well, permaculturegardens.org. But you put in what your roof square footage is, which is normally like, don't worry about the pitch or how steep it is, just like it's how it was if it were flat. And in a 1-inch rain event, you can calculate how many gallons of water you can collect. And with that water, you can determine how many rain barrels you need to install to capture all the water. So I'm thinking dry lands people, you're always on my mind. I have a series of webinars just for you, and I have like a blog. I have a blog coming up in the summer that's California, gardens, how to garden in California, because I have some permy friends in California that are giving a talk for us on drought proofing your garden. But that's all to say, like, capture water everywhere it goes, right? And in this case, we were talking about differences, different microclimates earlier. And here you can see how the different layers of these scales of permanence are used in design. This is what we call in permaculture an herb spiral. And when you first like graduate or finish your permaculture design certificate, you start installing, you find yourself installing these everywhere because they're fun and they look pretty. And you can grow a lot in a small space with this design. So this herb spiral has a microclimate different on the top than it has in the bottom. Let me see what you guys are all saying. How do I access the workbook? Okay, there is a link in the chat that I hope that you guys had seen. But so I don't lose my flow, I'm not gonna look at the chat anymore. I want to interact with you guys, and but at the same time, I also want to be respectful of the time. So an herb spiral makes use of the different moisture conditions, different. It even has an orientation, so you would face it like west, and where the west part is, where it gets more sun, because the sun sets in the west, you would put the basil, because the basil can hack a lot of the heat, and the rosemary and Mediterranean herbs like lavender and thyme, they're on top. And what do you think would be in the bottom soggy part of this herb spiral? I can't help it. I have to like, yes, K mint. So that is what that's about. That's what water is about. It's kind of thinking small scale, large scale about it. So large scale would be your catchment area. So here's my formula. Again, download that workbook 10-organic-garden-steps on Bitly. And now we come to the 8th step. First thing is to observe, to think holistically. 3, note your zones of use. 4, know your local climate. 5, find your microclimate. 6, note topography. How much water runs across your roof? Where do people go? And here I don't know why this is not loading. What happened? Come on, did I not check? Okay, so that might have been an image of when I first plotted out, sketched out my school garden. I um, I had drawn I had drawn an image to maximize production without thought for where people pass. So then there was no access, there was no like way path for us or children to go through it. Same thing in my backyard. We were maximizing, small space, maximize production as much as possible. The kids were knocking down like the little raised beds that we were building because there was a natural pathway that needed to be there. So we would have to sacrifice some of that growing space for access. So think about that. Where do people go? Investigate the weeds that you don't know. So here's where I just have a picture of weeds here. Weeds can indicate what kind of soil you have. I don't have it at the top of my head right now, but it might be in that workbook where you can find out what the pH of your soil is, because you have, acidic soil, I think, is dandelion. And also it's a bioindicator, right? Weeds are bioindicators for something that the soil is either missing, that it's digging down for, or something that the soil is rich in, that it proliferates there because your soil is really rich in something that it likes, in a nutrient that it likes. In permaculture, we have a term for these plants, often called weeds, that actually bring nutrients from the lower levels of the soil up to their leaves. And we call them dynamic accumulators because they accumulate a lot of the nutrients in their leaves, and then you can chop and drop them and they become your fertilizers. I have like a little spreadsheet of what, chicory and what mineral it brings up and something of that sort, but I don't have it on me right now. I may have it in the workbook or just email me, but it is out there what different things, what different weeds go, and you can just like chat GPT at this point, I think, with some, of course, some judicious studying and researching to find out why is there dandelion here all the time? Is it because and why is there a plantain? If you pull out the thing, do you notice that your weed has a deep taproot? Maybe it's because you have clay soil, and that weed is Mother Nature's way of really balancing things out and making the soil less clayey, right? If you see a borage or some weed with netting, like a lot of fibrous fibrous roots, they with netting hairs, that's because they're trying to collect the crumbling soil. And then you may have, really worked on soil that's been grazed on and worked on a lot and bulldozed and such, and that's the first weed that comes, is because it's Mother Nature's way of just protecting the soil and making things right again. Finally, make it look pretty. Find a shape in your yard. So first thing is to observe, to think holistically. 3, note your zones of use. 4, know your local climate. 5, find your microclimate. 6, note topography. How much water runs across your roof? Where do people go? Investigate the weeds that you don't know. And then finally, make it look pretty. Find a shape in your yard. It's fun to wander through these 10 steps with you. And now I hope to see you grow. And that's it. So aesthetics, there's a lot in garden design. In fact, that's what permaculture is almost like the opposite of beautiful. It has this reputation, okay, for being really ugly and jungly looking. And so I've added this. I don't think this is in P.A. Yeoman's original. I think this is in my teacher's 10 scales of permanence. Maybe or maybe not. He has an eye to these shapes and such. But I know that one thing that I wanted to bring about with this, some people, they don't understand everything that we just talked about in terms of sustainability, in terms of protecting the soil and not having it erode, in terms of growing organic. But when they see a beautiful garden and they see that it's productive, that's all they need to see. That says it all. So we have it, in my opinion, we also have a challenge to grow our permaculture diverse, beautiful gardens with a beautiful image in mind, with shape, with punctuation, using these guidelines that are for visual artists, that they use in order to create art in our gardens. So shape, try to find a cohesive shape, a shape within a shape. An example of this is not my yard yet. This is an example right here, but a permaculture farm, and I think the best people, and I've just written a blog about this, which is not yet published, and it's about the French potager gardens. I think the French permies, the French permaculturalists, are the best ones to implement beauty and production in the same place. So check out Le Ferme de Bec Halloween, I don't know how you pronounce that, but it's the people who wrote the book Miraculous Abundance, great people, permaculturists in France. Beautiful gardens and productive ones in a bigger space than most people, but beautiful nonetheless. So you'll see these shapes, circles and punctuated. So how do you keep it pretty? I find use the same materials. So I'm, for instance, making a wattle fence. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's like a woven fence, very native technique. And so I'm trying to use the same stakes. So it's punctuated by the same stakes. I'm trying to plant similar things. Yes, they're interplanted with different crops, but they're similar punctuations within my design so that I'm repeating myself and it's easy on the eyes. Proportion, if you have a small garden, don't plant a watermelon. That's definitely what we got cited on in our HOA, pumpkins growing outside our tiny townhouse. Cardoons are huge, huge thistle-like flowers that the artichoke in the artichoke family. I see them in the huge museums in Washington, D.C. and the Smithsonian. Beautiful. It's like perfect there. And I can put them now in my bigger place, but we couldn't, visually plant them unless you really wanted to eat a cardoon, which by the way, it's kind of hard to cook, not like an artichoke, in our tiny townhouse. So like have that respect too for what you can plant within your space. Yet have the freedom, you can be whimsical. I think we did have cardoon once in the front, just to be fun. So with that, all the world's problems can be solved in the garden, Jeff Lawton says. I think this is true. This is why I go back to the garden again and again. And this season, more than anything, has given me hope because it's the beginning of new beginnings, of new possibilities. You can find us at permaculturegardens.org, on Instagram. I'm not that active there, but I hope to be before the year ends. Or email us, permaculturegardens@gmail.com. We have a community of growers through our Grow It Yourself program and our Grow It Yourself community. We have an app, by the way, that reminds you when to water your plants, when to seed start them, to transplant them, and design them using biodiversity in mind, using the different functions that I mentioned, dynamic accumulation, nitrogen fixation. I'm very proud of this app, and my husband is a programmer, and so that's why I'm his tester. But it's also in the works. I mean, it's also like a work in progress, guys. So you have helped us build this app. Maybe some of you here have helped us support us in our Kickstarter with this, where we did a great Kickstarter last year. And the result of that is now what is Sage. And finally, Q&A. And I'm going to stop share here and answer your questions. Emma.
You, Nikki. Wow, that was so fun. I learned so much. And I actually found a link for the original song that I'm gonna put in the chat in case anyone's curious.
It is such a World War II, kind of song, like in the Philippines.
Yes, Perry Como.
Yeah, it's like my grandmother's song, or our and that would be like our ABC nursery rhymes growing up in the Philippines. So that's what.
Yeah.
But
Okay, well, I got a few questions for you already.
great.
Heather asks if you could speak more about how you've done terracing. She lives in an area with steep hills and she fears that she loses a lot of soil nutrients because of this.
Absolutely. And I'm with you because I also live on that mountain, right? Mountaintop. We see it's raining right now. We see it going down. And one is, Heather, I would love to know how big your acreage is and whether it can be designated as a farm, because as far as I know so far, and I've applied for this as well, there is some support from USDA. I don't know, okay, a lot of the things are frozen, but I've been able to receive some details about this, and somebody just reached out saying we're going to visit your farm and check it out. So they can help with match some of the funding if this is an issue, because if it is a steep terrain, it may need an excavator, and that's costly. We ourselves are like trying to rent an excavator so that we can plant our fruit trees on contour. So one place to go to is like the topographic maps that you can get online with a GIS, geological, now I don't know what the GIS stands for, survey, right? You can plug in your exact address and it will hopefully generate what your contour lines are in your property. As I said, this is something that I'm still learning as I'm going. But it's it's wonderful to know that you can, if you have an excavator, you can sort of flatten an area so that it becomes more flat and the water retains it there, but you flatten it according to the contour lines. I don't have any images right now readily available with the time that we have, but if you want to reach out and talk about it further, I'm happy to, to help however I can with this. But this is a larger scale thing to do. It's not something like building the drainage ditch that we did in the downspout, which I did. And I'm like, oh, I'm not like manual labor kind of person, but I was able to do it in 3 days. So that kind of thing I can do. But if it's like a big property, like, that's more like an excavator that you'd have to rent for that. Anything else?
And just a transparent moment here, Nikki. I forgot to ask you ahead of time if you have a hard stop at the top of the hour or if going over a
Oh no,
few
we
minutes
can.
is okay.
Yeah, is that okay with everyone? Yes, I did
Yeah.
want
And if you have to leave at the top of the hour, remember you all will receive the recording.
yes.
I'm getting lots of questions about keeping out squirrels, bunnies, deer. Any advice?
Yes. Okay. So it depends on your context again. All right. So squirrels, like mammals. All right. So this is, and then there's so many different approaches, right? Humane versus non-humane. And I try to do the humane as much as possible. We've never had it to the point that we needed, except for rats, okay, that I needed to do. And all rodents are, they don't pass gas, so they will die if you like feed them baking soda laced, like cookies laced with baking soda. Um, so that's like the extreme of that, the inhumane, right? Then the humane one is you can create a little trap crop for them. If you live in a terrace, like we had this for our squirrels too, on our patio, we hung a those pine cones that you put glue over them and you put all the seeds and it's like a bird feeder.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, those squirrels love that. Okay. So that's temporary, like hang that where the squirrel can reach it and it'll attack that before it attacks your tomatoes. But I have had, see if I can, I can't like pull up all the pictures of my of people that I've helped in the past, but I have had uh, a client have that problem, and she was growing tomatoes on her patio, and she just put the netting and fencing around the tomatoes. So that's the other thing. And so same with us, like we don't shoot, like we don't have a gun in our house, and we have like I can actually get a permit to shoot deer. Deer is our number one right now crisis, but all we're doing is netting and fencing, and that's the other side of it. It's like netting and fencing to the max. So some of your garden budget's gonna have to go to those garden staples and mesh netting, or actually putting fencing around.
Nartha asks if you have any tips for someone who has to use raised beds in the Pacific Northwest.
Raised beds in the Pacific Northwest. Okay. What is your main there's no problem. You can totally use raised beds. And the tips that I would say
Great.
are the same. Yeah, the same for all across the board. Um, there are the issues with like the Pacific Northwest, which I think would just be climate, right? Soil. I think number one thing that this webinar doesn't have time for is the soil. So having a baseline understanding of your soil and the minerals in it is important so that and I have just composting. That's the main thing. And then when you have your heat to get the varieties that are akin to your climate, the particular tomatoes that grow well for the Pacific Northwest is better than just any random tomato, because especially with like the heat domes that you experience, that shock, hopefully the tomatoes there will be more acclimatized to
Um, oh, my
that.
window just moved.
So
Uh,
Irish Spring Bar Soap, yes. Oh, thank you so much. I will try that, right? I've tried everything. Irish Bar Spring Soap.
I know exactly what that smells like because that's what my grandpa uses.
Does it work, Emma?
I don't know if it works for deer, but it
Yeah, I mean,
My
and
grandpa
we've learned
looks.
so many. Yeah, we've learned a few things like that, like hornet's nest. There's a hornet's nest. We didn't come out of our house for 3 days, except in bee suits, which we happen to have because we also
Oh,
keep
wow.
Dawn dish soap down there, a hole. So, I mean, not hornets. What are they? The yellow jackets. Yellow
Yellow
jackets. So the yellow
jackets.
jacket holes that are in ground. Because, and then we were having guests too, like a tour, a garden tour, and we had yellow jackets around.
All right. For someone who is brand new to this and starting their very first garden, where do you recommend they start?
I would start with, and this is, you're not going to hear this from many other people, microgreens. I would start with
Mm,
microgreens
okay.
because, yeah, and that's how we teach our clients. It's a sure win in a week and a half. Um, and you can say, I grew my own food in a week and a half or 2 weeks, and my client, I actually have a chef who's coming here. I hope my husband answers for her microgreens. So, sorry for 1 second. Let me just see. Davy, thank you.
We're live, folks. We are live.
Yeah,
It's
so
okay.
she was running late because of the rain, but yeah, the chef just came for her microgreens, and you can make it a business too, like that, right? But you have the food right there, no excuse. If you set your microgreens that you grow, and you can basically plant your pantry. So on our website, we also have like a plant your pantry challenge.
Oh, I did that challenge. It was so fun. You
Yeah, no need to buy anything. Just grab the garbanzo beans or some lentils that are in your pantry and start growing those. Um, and if you want to be more intentional about it, then go ahead and find your microgreen seeds. But yeah,
Great. Thank you. Um, all right. Well, I don't see any new questions in the chat. There's a ton of tips in there for keeping various pests away and
yeah,
lots of expressions of gratitude to you, Nikki. So
thank
thank you
you.
so much for joining us today. I think we all learned a lot and folks were saying they feel inspired. So thank you so, so much. And thank you to everyone for joining. I'm gonna put up our last slide here so that folks can see some QR codes. All right. And just to do our official closeout, and I'll go back on camera now. Thank you for joining us today and being a part of Green America's Climate Victory Gardens community. Together, we can make a real difference in creating positive change for our planet and its people. You can keep the momentum going and stay connected by subscribing to our newsletter to remain informed about our latest campaigns, events, and sustainability tips. Your support fuels our work toward a greener, fairer future. Consider donating today to help us continue our vital programs and initiatives, including these free gardening webinars. Every contribution counts. Remember, your actions matter, including those we make in our own home gardens. And together we can build a more sustainable and just world. Thank you. Thank you for your commitment to creating positive change, and we look forward to seeing you at our future gardening webinars. Thank you so much, everyone. We will send that recording around. Nikki shared a bunch of resources with me, and I will include that in the follow-up email. Thank you so much. Share and end. Bye, Nikki. Thank you.